When the Olivier Award-winning actor Henry Goodman visited the Department of Theatre, Film and Television at the University of York for 2 days of filmed workshops on Ben Jonson's plays, we devoted most of our time to exploring Volpone and Every Man in His Humour. But we did find half an hour in which Henry and I could work together on a much less often praised play, one of Jonson's 2 Roman tragedies, Sejanus. It has almost no performance history in modern times, though the Royal Shakespeare Company did mount a praised production of it in 2006. It wasn't a play which Henry knew. It wasn't a play he'd ever read, and he deliberately refrained from reading it in advance of our session together. He wanted to come to the text completely fresh. The scene we chose to concentrate on comes at the end of Act 3 and is the moment of pivotal decision in the play. It involves 3 political players at the top of the Roman hierarchy: the Emperor Tiberius, his chief henchman Sejanus, and the man who will quite soon inherit Sejanus's position, Macro. Some modern commentators doubt whether Jonson distinguishes sufficiently in the ways in which he writes dialogue between different characters, or rather between the ways in which different figures on his stage cope with crisis, make major decisions, respond to stimulus and challenge. Yet this is a playwright who famously said, "Language most shows the man, speak that I may see thee." So we thought we would experiment with Tiberius, with Sejanus and Macro at this critical moment in Rome's history and see whether, exploring the text together, we could distinguish between the ways in which the 3 figures are registered by Jonson. Okay, we have in front of us a facsimile of the folio, so we can stroke it, as Jonson would like us
have
to
white
do,
gloves
no
on.
doubt. Only a facsimile, so it's okay. We've been every so often across the 2 days of conversation touching upon the fact that he had a formidable influence on the printing of this volume, and that included being hypersensitive about punctuation,
Right.
using the full range of available punctuation, which by and large most books of the time didn't do, using a much heavier system of punctuation than almost any modern playwright is likely to use, and certainly than any modern edition of the plays is likely to use. But presumably had a purpose to it. He was a sophisticated rhetorician. He was very interested in grammar and the relationship of the parts of a sentence. So presumably, he hoped it would communicate. The volume itself is meant to be monumental. It's the first collection of a dramatist's works in English. The claim is, "Here I am, read me." In other words, I've put onto the page as much instruction.
The claim is, read me, but read me on my terms.
Yeah, well, I'm giving you every help to read me accurately, as it were. I mean, he keeps making jokes in prefaces and other places that he is only interested in understanding readers. So I take it that he hopes that the system he's putting in place will help multiply the number of understanding readers. This is not a text intended to help actors, I think. On the other hand, I don't imagine he ever thinks of reading as anything other than an oral business, i.e. that you read aloud, you actually hear it upon your voice and you phrase it the way in which an ideal speaking voice would.
Right.
So potentially, just as surmise, there ought to be some assistance here if we were imagining that we were going to stage one of the plays that are in the folio in actually hearing it in a more vivid way.
But now we've moved into Sejanus and we're into the classical mode, which has a whole different palette of the use of language. His absolute inspiration, Horace, and all of those, that mode of thinking is behind.
Well, a host of different writers. Yes. Horace perhaps more in other works than in this. But he's also aiming to make it, while there is, there's a whole hinterland of classical allusion and indebtedness here, he wants it to speak as a play that works on the globe stage.
Can I ask you a mundane question? Why is it about Sejanus and not Caesar? Or, I mean, why has he made Sejanus the centre of the play, do you think?
Well, the full title is Sejanus' Fall. Oh, right. So it's precisely the circumstance in which a man thinks everything is within his grasp. And like Icarus, his wings melt, and off he goes. And there is a Marlovian debt behind it. I mean, Jonson is in many ways a Marlovian writer. And here, my instinct is that the first speech, I'll set the scene of the speech in a minute,
Right.
but the first speech is heavily Marlowe-like, because it is Sejanus and it is the figure who will be Icarus and fall. The situation, we're at the end of Act 3, Sejanus is Tiberius's chief hatchet man and minister, a man who has benefited in the inflation of his own ego from the fact that Tiberius likes an easy life, is frequently out of Rome, indulging in decadent pursuits on Capri in particular. He's begun to feel that he makes everything work, Sejanus that is, and begins to feel that the time has come for him to make a move. So he suggests a marriage, which he says would be entirely because Tiberius would be advantaged by it.
You look at me
for
as a-
himself.
I'm
You're
Tiberius.
Tiberius. You're a natural casting for Tiberius. And it's a mistake, because it immediately signals to Tiberius that this man has ambitions that will be dangerous to him.
It's got a very strong connection with Wolsey and Henry VIII, isn't it?
It's that heavy next man to the king
Of
problem, as it
enabling a
were.
hugely powerful chancellor. And I'm just trying to think. So that's
But
one of the
Wolsey
late
never-
plays. So this
Wolsey-
is before.
Wolsey never sought to displace. There was no way that Wolsey could have displaced Henry.
Well,
though.
Henry VIII wouldn't have said that.
Well, he felt his power might become practically day by day more than his,
Yes.
rather than he would actually. This
Right,
is
okay.
actually a man who wants the imperial throne.
All right.
Yeah, so it's that. So Tiberius fobs him off with excuses and leaves.
Right.
And so the first passage that we've got on the typewriter in front of us is the beginning of Sejanus' soliloquy.
So
that
what's
follows.
just happened is
It is Tiberius has, in an infinitely polite way, doffed aside the suggestion that Sejanus might marry Livia. Said it wouldn't be to your advantage, people would envy you too much, they'd feel you were getting out of your place. It's very kind of you to have suggested it, but for your sake we won't do it. And he goes. And then this follows. Now, the remainder of the scene is this soliloquy. Sejanus goes. Tiberius returns, thinks about the political problem he's now got,
right.
sends for Macro, finishes his soliloquy working out what he's going to do. Macro arrives. Macro is the next man down in the power chain.
Right.
And he asks Macro to look after
So
Rome.
Tiberius
on his-
Caesar, Sejanus,
Macro.
Macro.
And he asks Macro to look after, be an extra pair of eyes for me while I'm away.
Spy.
Do watch out for the opposition,
Yeah.
particularly these ones. There are some people on my side who are a bit dodgy. Watch out for them. Oh, for completeness' sake, includes Sejanus.
Right.
And Macro knows that something big has been said. So Tiberius goes, and Macro is left alone to meditate.
Right. So then we, in the last speech, we hear from Macro.
Yeah. So what I've typed for us, using the punctuation of the folio,
Right.
is the beginning of the three soliloquies. So Sejanus, then
Tiberius.
Tiberius, then Macro. And my proposition would be that the punctuation lets us understand that these either are different intelligences at work, or at any rate, men who are coping with a particular challenge in quite different ways of thinking,
Good.
about
Well,
organising their
the
thoughts.
good thing about this situation is I've purposely not read this play. I don't know this play well at all. So I'm going to be picking up the cues from the text in a virgin way, which is great, and inevitably being inspired and encouraged by them. So is it useful? Do you want me to just speak
Explore
aloud the
them.
thoughts?
Yeah, and see what happens,
So and ask the sort of questions that might come up. Straight away we're into Tiberius has just left, I think, or is he still on stage at this point?
No, he's gone.
He's gone. So Sejanus is on his own,
Yes, and
it's Sejanus speaking. All right.
And the immediate cue is, we're resolved, Tiberius says, and Sejanus says, here's some motives more, which I've thought on since, been more confirmed. They're talking about a small decision and not the big one. Tiberius says, careful, Sejanus, taking great care. Yeah. We will straight peruse them, go forward in our main design and prosper. And so if those but take, i.e. the papers in Caesar's hand.
Right. So,
So
just pure
the
sense
cue.
is always
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
crucial
yeah,
to
yeah.
be very prosaic and make sure I've got the sense right. So if those but take, I shall.
Prosper.
Meaning I shall prosper.
Yeah.
So if those but take, so he's just said, go forward in our main design and prosper. If those but take, I shall, dull heavy Caesar. Would thou tell me thy favours were made crimes, and that my fortunes were esteemed thy faults? That thou for me wert hated, and not think I would with winged haste prevent that change, when thou mightst win all to thyself again by forfeiture of me? Okay, so I'm just beginning, first time ever, to sort of get my head around. So he's beginning to think aloud, wait a minute, what just happened between us? You're trying to make me think that I should trust you? Something of that nature. Well, when actually you might drop me and for your own good. You might wipe me out.
Slightly more precise than that. Would thou tell me thy favours, your favours to me, were regarded as crimes by the people of Rome, and that my fortunes, my promotion, were regarded as your faults. My fortunes were esteemed thy faults. That thou, for me, wert hated. I.e., he's telling him.
Now, there's an interesting thing here. Forgive me, is whether an audience. The first way for an audience to understand anything or believe in it is if it's got to be understood and believed by the actor. I'm being very simple about this. So in purchasing this attitude and this insight from this first connection to the script, the clarification you've just given enables, simple though I am obviously being, but without it there's no way. So that if you don't, in other words, I'm saying if you don't ask the questions at this point in the initial contact with the text, you're stuffed.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And challenge everything and really try to, rather than generally quickly grasp it and try to get the emotional sense through it, but and that my fortunes were esteemed thy faults. As you describe it, my ability to thrive and go somewhere in life and improve in the state is attached to the word fortunes.
Yes,
now
and specifically you're promoting me.
Yeah, you're promoting me. Now, would the audience understand that from what's gone before?
What he's doing is summarising what Tiberius has just said.
So from the scene before.
So all three speeches begin with thinking about what has just been said. So there's an ecosystem working across them.
Okay. If those but take, I shall, dull heavy Caesar. So it's immediately there's a private sense of you, tosser.
Yeah.
You know. I've had this scene with you. He goes and then he thinks, I don't respect you. There's something I'm being very obvious about.
No, absolutely.
If the stuff I've just unleashed with you in the previous scene were so that whether it's Machiavellian or Iago-like or whatever, that there's a sense of he's gone now. I can speak frankly. I'm being very obvious about it. What that does is liberate my own instincts. If I just so if those but take, I shall, dull heavy Caesar. Would thou tell me thy favours were made crimes, and that my fortunes were esteemed thy faults? That thou for me wert hated? So I'm very conscious of playing now with the ping pong of ba-dee, ba-da, ba-doo, ba-ba, ba-bee, ba-ba, ba-bee, ba-ba, ba-bee, ba-ba, ba-bee, and it's built into the bounce of the sense in the verse, the structure of the writing. That thy favours were made crimes, that my fortunes were esteemed thy faults, and the F and the F at the middle of the line, at the end of the line, are to reinforce that. Jonson's made a point of that. I'm being very obvious, but these are tools.
And behind that, it's sarcastic, isn't it? You've been stupid as to reveal your hand.
If thou tell me thy favours were made my crimes, that my fortunes were esteemed thy faults, that thou for me wert hated, and not think I would with winged haste prevent that change, when thou mightst win all to thyself. So that change will come when thou mightst win all to thyself again by forfeiture of me. So there's another F. So we're reminded of favours, fortunes, faults, and then forfeiture. So there's an architecture of, in the second line there's two Fs, in the fourth line and even if it might be subliminal, if the actor's aware of it, then the audience might be.
Yes, absolutely.
The taste of those Fs coming at certain points in the poetry.
And what you've done is to speed up and go for fluency the minute you get to a not think, which also reflects what we have in front of us, because what we haven't said is, it goes, if thou but take, I shall, : dull, heavy Caesar, exclamation mark.
So
would you tell
breaks
me,
in the punctuation, short lines, short sense.
would
and
you
then
tell
the
me, comma, thy favours were made crimes, another question mark, that my fortunes were esteemed thy faults, question mark, that thou, comma, for me, comma,
question
hated,
mark,
question mark,
and now
that, and not think I would with winged haste.
so there's enjambment and
Yes.
and
winged
the
haste
thought flies
enacts
on.
itself
Yeah.
as it goes. So it's narcissistic. I'm so brilliant. I'm going to. Yeah.
So this unpicking these very basic things just liberates the thought flow and starts to give us an instinct into his character. Yeah.
And he's got into decisiveness quite fast, right?
Yeah.
If those but take, I shall, dull, heavy, Caesar. Would you tell me thy favours were made crimes, that my fortunes were esteemed thy faults, that thou for me wert hated, and not think decision points that soon, that clear.
Yes.
I've got to solve this, and the rest of it is actually effectively how I will cancel you. The rest
So very quickly we start to discover a man in terms of his psychology who says, you think you can speak to me like that, and I don't get, that he's quickly onto, there's a quick thinking senator of the people, a well-educated,
and a coup is going to happen. Well, actually,
survival merchant.
He's actually very low. He's crept up. He's been a male prostitute, they say.
Oh, right.
He is not from the senatorial
But
class.
he has an appetite to survive and climb the ladder.
Well, he's the
and he's quick
overreacher.
thinking.
He's the overreacher figure from Marlowe,
Right.
the guy who comes from outside
Yeah.
and comes to dominate the whole
Right.
thing. Yeah.
Right.
But the rest of it is Marlovian in terms of that boastfulness, because now, having made the decision, he's just going to do the things necessary as he sees it to mount a coup. He goes, on comes Tiberius. Tiberius has a little bit before I pick it up, because he sends a servant off, and I've picked it up after the servant. So he begins to marry Livia. So questions again. Will no less, Sejanus, content thy aims? No lower object? Well. So question marks in the same way, but different.
I see the structure.
The
Let's
rhythm is different.
just help me, because I'm being a little slow and careful here. So the Olivia marriage thing was discussed with Tiberius in the
Yes.
previous scene.
She's Tiberius' daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law. And why don't you marry? He says to
I'll marry her for you, because that would be neutral. That will
Yeah.
neutralise her.
So-
No one else can have
So the
her.
audience are with us just to
Yes,
take us all
absolutely,
together.
yes.
And then, so Caesar goes and Sejanus says this.
Thou knowest how thou art wrought into our trust, woven in our design, and thinkst we must now use thee whatsoever thy projects are.
Yeah.
'Tis true, but yet with caution and fit care.
Right.
It's a creeping voice, right?
Right.
Yeah. And now we better think, who's there within? Servant says Caesar. And then we pick up what we've got on the passages in front of us. The servant comes, but Tiberius doesn't talk to him. Tiberius goes on thinking, right?
To marry Olivia. Well, no.
Well,
Well,
to
no
leave our
less-
journey
no,
off.
I'm just
is
thinking,
where- sorry,
just,
yes.
to get my head on, even though we're going to concentrate on what's this little bit you've jumped, just to make those thoughts my own, to marry
Yeah.
Olivia, will no less, Sejanus, content thy aims? No lower object? Well.
And that's the equivalent to that thou for me wert hated. You said that much and not think. Oh well, you've revealed yourself.
Wow.
So the answer.
So a paraphrase of that is, I see, so you're aiming that high. Is that a fair paraphrase?
Yeah. And therefore are dangerous beyond that. Yes.
Thou knowest how thou art wrought into our trust, woven in our design. So he's a man of designs and all that.
Well, actually, so totally important to my power structure.
Yes, yeah.
That I can't dispense with you.
Yes. We must now use thee for thy projects.
Whatsoever.
So whatsoever thy projects are, 'tis true, but yet with caution and fit care.
So it's like it's.
So he's thinking on his feet.
But slowly.
Okay, if that's the case, then we do this, and then we do that, and then we go into this next section, which is a continuation.
So
even though the servant is there, he's so locked up in his thoughts, he doesn't engage with him.
Yes. So here we've got shoo resolution.
Yeah.
Here we've got I see. Oh well, yes I have to, but it's crab-like, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the punctuation is what we haven't said. For those who haven't got in front, is enormously heavy. To marry Livia, question mark. Will no less, comma, Sejanus, comma, content thy aims, question mark.
Yeah.
No lower object, question mark. Well, exclamation mark.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
it's very...
Can I just ask you, here, who's there within, he says, and then Caesar.
The servant answers, Caesar. So he's coming on, the servant.
No,
Jonson.
who speaks all this?
The servant speaks that.
Yes.
Tiberius. Sorry, what we should say is that Jonson's preferred way of laying out a divided line is to print it as a single line and put abbreviated speech prefixes within the line.
That's why I wanted to just check, because it looks like the servant speaks that, but it's
no,
servant says
Caesar
is
then
there.
Tiberius says to leave our journey off. And it does therefore mean that he is insisting that the line is integral. It matters to him.
Yeah. In other words, the one speech hands over to the other, and the meter keeps flowing.
Yes.
The actors need to work together to serve a bigger thing
and the
than
line
each.
Overwhelmingly matters to him to the point of insisting on it print in a way no other Renaissance text does. Because with Shakespeare, divided lines, as you know, in the folio, are all justified to the left margin.
Yes.
So and people fight as to what's a divided line and so on. As a result, with Jonson, it's always clear.
So there are signals in this folio that Jonson's sending of important imperatives in the.
He now goes on thinking, and he goes on thinking without the question marks and the exclamation marks, but still with very heavy punctuation in the bit that we have in front of us.
What I can't quite understand is, he said, who's there? And the servant says, Caesar.
Yes.
And then he goes on privately thinking.
Well, he's now got the servant in readiness for when he needs him. The servant, let's imagine, is far upstage, and Tiberius is
again, this thing
thinking.
about character, situation breeds, the audience will pick up immediately. Oh, Caesar's there.
I think
the Prime Minister's there. Oh, I'll just go on talking and ignore them. What's going
I
on
think we
there?
imagine that what we're hearing is the internal thoughts.
So who is that within? So it's, what can I hear? Rather than
it doesn't mean
it's not somebody trying to meet me.
Who's there within means come and attend me.
See, it's important to get this right, isn't it?
Who's there within? And a servant comes. A servant is ready whenever he needs him. In a little while, he'll send him.
But the servant says, Caesar?
Caesar? What can I do, Caesar?
Yeah. To me?
Yeah.
I'm Caesar.
You've become Tiberius. You see, I knew you would.
It's really just basic stuff.
Absolutely.
Situation, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Who's there within? Attend me. The guy comes in, he says, Caesar, I'm on duty, plot. Right. I'm being very obvious about it.
Tiberius goes on with his thoughts.
And then Tiberius says, right, okay, so I've got a servant on. And is anything he's saying here so private that this servant, you often get this in Edwardian plays and others where people say, it's sort of Downton Abbey world, isn't it? Where people say appalling things and the servants are standing there with silver trays listening to all this stuff about personal revelation.
Well, servants are dispensable.
Yeah.
The servant won't betray him. Servant can be destroyed in a second.
So he's not in any way.
The play makes clear that Tiberius reigns by terror, right from the beginning.
Okay. Yeah. To leave our journey off, were sin against our decreed delights, and would appear doubt, or what less becomes a prince, low fear. Yet doubt hath law, and fears have their excuse, where princes' states plead necessary use, as ours doth now, more in Sejanus' pride than all fell Agrippina's hates beside. It's quite complicated stuff, isn't it? Even though I can get better at making sense of it, it is machinating writing, isn't it?
Well, and it's as tightly woven a way of thinking out a complicated thought as he can write.
To leave our journey off were sin against our decreed delights.
He has announced that he's going to Capri. So at this moment for him, and Capri where it gets up to all kinds of unmentionable acts, so decreed delights.
To leave our journey off
was sin against our decree.
And for an emperor
at this moment to say we're not going to go there.
I've publicly announced I'm going away having a holiday with all my
weakness.
pleasures. And why should I give it up?
And would appear, doubt means fear in this period, not doubtfulness, right? And would appear, and you might even modernize it. Yes.
Well, except that or would appear doubt or low fear.
Doubt.
He distinguishes between doubt and fear.
All right, I'll give another paraphrase, suspicion.
It's a higher fear. Yes.
Suspicion, something like that.
It's a higher form of
suspicion.
But because just as a sort of lay person coming to the Roman world, there's this absolute obsession with status and martial power, and all the display of wealth and all the rest of it, which they all inherit. It's almost like American imperative for ego and to be present and to get somewhere, and everybody can be a winner, and which is part of the American ethos. In Rome, a man is a man. That messed up the mic, didn't it? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do. Sorry, I was just looking at Richard sighing.
Oh my God, 20,000 quid's worth of mic. Hopefully mostly hit my chest. But so I suppose what I'm trying to do is to buy into the imaginative world, which is taken for granted behind this.
Yeah.
Right.
And
to leave our journey off, our meaning the royal plural,
Yeah.
to leave our journey off were sin against our decreed delights, and would appear doubt, or what less is, or what less becomes, or what less becomes a prince, low fear. These are distasteful in the extreme. These things, doubt or low fear.
Dangerous.
Yet doubt hath law, and fears have their excuse. Now that's a complicated, interesting. Mm-hmm. So it would look beneath me to show lack of self-esteem or fear or whatever, and yet doubt hath law, and fears have their excuse. Well, if you're suspicious,
there may be a very good reason for it. And fears can be quite rational, where princes, states plead necessary use.
So it's important in this thing, picking up on what you're saying, to keep the thread of the thought moving through the whole couplet. Yet doubt hath law, and fears have their excuse, where princes, states plead necessary use.
And I think that's meant to be taken by us. This recurs in his speeches as an axiom out of a book by some learned thinker. Yeah, because there are these little outcroppings of rhyme passages, and each of them tends to be a political aphorism, right? So, yet doubt hath law, and fears have their excuse, where, and I remember it well from my school days, princes, states plead necessary use, as ours doth now. And so he's applying it, in other words, if it's not the opposite kind of mind to Sejanus says, my God, he's just blown it, I see what he's up to, so I'll do this.
One of the things that is happening here is there's an imperative for an intelligence in acting this stuff. Yeah. Jonson is saying, I want an understanding, I'm quoting him as you were saying, an understanding audience, but he's also saying, I want an intelligent, understanding actor. You have no choice in the matter. You've got to get your head round
there is a legend that Shakespeare played this role, but
played Tiberius, or
Tiberius.
Well, he'd certainly be an intelligent actor.
And the kind of, it's not a revelation, because he could probably see it coming with Sejanus, but Sejanus has now got out in the open, as ours doth now, more in Sejanus' pride than what I've known all this time, which is that I've got an enemy in Agrippina and her tribe, and all fell Agrippina's hates beside. And he goes on to say, the dangerous man is the man who's beside you, not the man who's over there.
Just remind me the relationship of Agrippina to these people.
Another powerful family, which will in due course create the Emperor of Rome.
The Emperor of Rome.
Nero. It comes from that. Yeah.
So shall I just try and get my head through that? To leave our journey off were sin against our decreed delights, and would appear doubt, or what less becomes a prince, low fear. Yet doubt hath law, and fears have their excuse, where princes' states plead necessary use. That would be more where princes' states plead necessary use. Yes. It's not a question of just the stress, but what is the sense of it? More weight on the verb.
Where princes' states
plead
necessary use.
Yes, where princes' states plead necessary use. All right. As ours doth now. So the urgency of the current situation is the key thing, right?
But I take comfort in the fact that I've got an abstract nostrum from the past that will help me manoeuvre my way through this.
I'm repeating this. Too many cooks spoil the broth. This nostrum, this axiom, and using it to my own end. Where princes' state plead necessary use, as ours doth now, more in Sejanus' pride than all fell Agrippina's hates beside.
So new situation. That feels to me a wholly different way of using language, of making a mind operate in soliloquy.
So as I learn to understand it and pick these cues up from the literary guidance and the codes built into it, the stage management that Jonson's giving us of how the audience should then, through me inhabiting it, should start to feel this guy and the way he behaves differently from another one.
And this guy feels, doesn't he, as though he thinks longer and harder.
Tiberius.
And more rootedly than the other guy. The other guy simply thinks, you're weak, I can topple you.
You think I would not, with the previous man, Sejanus, the title of the play, whose fall it's going to be about, and not think that I would with winged haste prevent that change, when thou mightst win all to thyself again by forfeiture of me? No ways, I'm going to the top and you're going down. You know, whereas this guy's, wait a minute, for me to not go on holiday would make me look weak. Yeah, okay, this is the whole paraphrase thing. Not to diminish it, but to make sure that one is speaking absolute sense.
And it's going to take this guy, this guy has made a slow move, which is, what effectively he's reached, I mean, Sejanus knows quickly Tiberius is now his enemy, right? And then proceeds. Tiberius, by the end of this, has simply identified that Sejanus is an enemy. He's now going to take a long time thinking about how he neutralizes him.
Right.
It's going to be
that a whole
right.
2 pages. Right.
So the habit of mind is wholly different, yeah? And then he summons Macro and he does the speech to him, and I said.
Right.
And then Macro is left alone. And this is the beginning.
So now we're on to the third speech and another character,
and
Macro, the third in power.
And it springs from what I said, that the instruction is to watch everyone in Rome, and let's just throw Sejanus in as well.
Right.
You know, Macro at that moment thinks something's really up. He probably feels it's odd to be summoned to Tiberius in this way anyway, but it's when he gets to say.
So when Macro, at the beginning of this next new speech, I will not ask why Caesar bids do this, what he's actually referring to is, because I'm Tiberius.
If I just give you the passage.
Yep, sure.
To be our eye and ear, to keep strict watch on Agrippina, Nero, Drusus, and on Sejanus. Not that we distrust his loyalty, or do repent one grace of all that heap we have conferred on him, for that were to disparage our election, and call that judgment now in doubt, which then seemed as unquestioned as an oracle. But greatness hath his cankers. Worms and moths breed out of too much humour in the things which after they consume, transferring quite the substance of their makers into themselves. Macro is sharp and apprehends, says Tiberius. Besides, I know him subtle, close, wise and well read in man and his large nature. He hath studied which way and he has studied affections, passions, knows their springs, their ends, which way and whither they will work. 'Tis proof enough of his great merit that we trust him. Then to a point, because our conference cannot be long without suspicion. Here, Macro, we assign thee both to spy, inform, and chastise. Think and use thy means, thy ministers, what were on whom thou wilt. Explore, plot, practice. All thou dost in this shall be as if the Senate, all the laws had given it privilege, and thou then styled the saviour, both of Caesar and of Rome. We will not take thy answer, but in act. Whereto, as thou proceedest, we hope to hear by trusted messengers. If it be inquired wherefore we called you, say you have in charge to see our chariots ready and our horse. Be still our loved and shortly honoured Macro. And he's gone.
I will not ask why Caesar bids do this, but joy that he bids me. It is the bliss of courts to be employed, no matter how. A prince's power makes all his actions virtue. We whom he works by are dumb instruments, to do but not to enquire. His great intents are to be served, not searched. Whatever you want, O powerful leader.
Yes, I mean,
I will do whatever you want.
Yes, it's the Eichmann moment, isn't it? I mean, I obeyed what I was told to do. Yeah, absolutely, yes. And again, it's rhythmically wholly different, isn't it? It's beautiful. It seems to me absolutely beautiful. But again...
There's a simple articulacy, the type of language, the different rhythm. So it was really helpful, you reading that so wonderfully and clearly. And, you know, also it's amazing that Caesar speaks in the royal plural to me, to Macro now. I'm being Macro. And you know, just, it's not often... I mean, to say, what is it? Macro is wise. Macro has studied humours, passions. And there it is again, that word affections. Which so often happens in Jonson and humours and all of that. He even says humours, I think, doesn't he? Yes, passions. So he flatters me and says, you know what I'm getting at. and you know when people are getting too big for their boots and maybe they need to be spied on.
Yeah.
Off you go, do what I ask you, and I say whatever you want. I will not ask why Caesar bids do this. And he's gone, so this is really private thinking aloud.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I mean, great.
So each of them are privately thinking aloud
About the previous person.
about the previous person in totally different ways, written in different ways.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
And to me, the cues there are multiple for the actors.
Yeah.
There was a terrific production of this play. Everyone thought it was not stageable on the modern stage, really.
Yes.
And Greg Doran at Stratford, whatever it was, 8 years ago or so, did it. And I was really impressed by it, and it was an extraordinary piece of work. But I didn't feel these characters stood out sufficiently from each other.
Right.
And it felt to me that the roots of that was in an attention to
And there
the
are
sheer
clues
difference.
for that differentiation
Yeah.
yeah.
Language most shows the man speak that I may see. There it is, you know? I mean, absolutely in action. So you must play Tiberius at some point. To learn a boy.
Fantastic.
I mean, he's got great, Macro's got great, well, the climax of his speech, were it to plot against the fame, the life of one with whom I twined, his wife. Remove a wife from my warm side, as loved as is the air. Practice away each parent, draw mine heir in compass, though but one. Work all my kin to swift perdition, leave no untrained engine for friendship or for innocence, nay, make the gods all guilty. I would undertake this, being imposed me, both with gain and ease. The way to rise is to obey and please. He that will thrive in state, he must neglect the trodden paths, the truth and right respect, and prove new, wilder ways. For virtue there is not that narrow thing he is elsewhere. Men's fortune there is virtue, reason their will, their license law, and their observance skill. Occasion is their soil, conscience their stain, profit their lustre, and what else is vain. If then it be the lust of Caesar's power to have raised Sejanus up, and in an hour or turn him tumbling down from height of all, we are his ready engine, and his fall may be our rise. It is no uncouth thing to see fresh buildings from old ruins spring.
So even he has got an eye to the rising, to the top.
But coded, I want to be Sejanus, I don't want to be Tiberius. He's absolutely saying, I see the danger. Yeah. I will never repeat Sejanus'
One of the things
mistake.
that's fascinating in relation to Volpone and Everyman and the things we've been doing, this is partly a sort of broader discussion, but is this trust that an audience can be fascinated, and not just people with degrees from Russell universities or whatever, but that a modern audience can be sucked in and trust, if we do the proper work, the development of an argument. Yeah. We tend to look at, say, Racine or French theatre as being this great sway. It could be frightening and distancing and off-putting, but what you're doing is unleashing and awakening and reminding us that with Shakespeare, and certainly with Jonson even more, what looks like academic, tough, classical verse, which is only for the cognoscenti, can be thrilling and dynamic.
It feels streetwise to me.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, actually, once you actually activate it. Foundations have been laid in a way that if you rest on their support, I don't mean you don't need to do much more than rest on them, but they're there in a very precisely articulated way. I mean, the climax of it is notoriously carried entirely by the reading aloud of the letter. Because Sejanus reads, Tiberius sends a letter to the Senate which praises Sejanus to the skies and then begins to rip his reputation apart. Yeah. So he leaves the Senate a condemned man. And that's the climax of the play, right. As Macro closes in on his assistance.
Can I ask you, Catiline, his other play?
I'm less enthusiastic about that. Yes.
Because many more people know about the Cato conspiracy or the Catiline situation, and I just wondered whether you, just out of interest, rate that as highly as
it's got an amazing central scene. Cicero addressing the Senate and slowly immobilising Catiline is wondrous.
Yeah.
But Catiline is very melodramatic. He's a nasty guy. There feels like no imaginative investment in him. You know,
right.
He's just a nasty who's got to be spat out.
Is that because Jonson probably was more turned on by Cicero than Catiline? A bit like Kitely, he couldn't stop himself. Fantastic.
He writes parts like, I mean, comic equivalents of Catiline elsewhere very vividly.
Right,
It just feels like he doesn't get inside him.
Right.
But that's a personal judgment. I don't think I would ever have dared to direct Sejanus, but it would attract me as a play in a way that Catiline doesn't.